Firstly, a very warm welcome to everyone who's here. This is very exciting for me. It's the first time we've done an event like this. My hope is that this event will be the first in a series of mini conferences like this one, but even more so, we'd like to do some practical workshops where we do much more interaction directly with people and try and look at practical solutions together. And please do tell us if you're interested in these in future. Our aim here is to stimulate innovation, whether it's for your business as a whole or for you personally in your career, by looking at, discussing, and also generating practical strategies for more creative, positive, and productive work. I should say this series of events is provided by Catalyst, especially the Catalyst Innovation Centre in Ballymena, and supported by the Mid and East Antrim Council. You can check out their websites, the addresses are here. We'll share all links and things like that afterwards. Please, in particular, check out the business support programs at the Mid and East Antrim Council website. We picked today particularly because, to kick off this series, because this is Global Entrepreneurship Week. I read that there are around 35,000 events in 165 countries this year. So happy Global Entrepreneurship Week. And I am here today in the offices of DisplayNote, who I thought were worth mentioning. They have a site at Catalyst in Belfast. They're old friends and a part of the community here. I would say they're not sponsors of this event at all. In fact, Ed Morgan from DisplayNote, who you'll meet later, had signed up for the panel before we had the idea to actually come down to their office and make use of their facilities, because DisplayNote, to use their own words, creates technology that simplifies how people present, share, and collaborate. So they are building technology very appropriate to what we're doing right now. Bit about me. My name is Ben Bland. Nice to meet you. I call myself a jack of many trades, but an expert of none. I've been working in digital for about 20 years across sort of project management, marketing and comms, and particularly in digital strategy, and particularly with startups and innovation with things like product strategy, collaboration, and operations processes. In that time, I actually had a Catalyst here as a client of mine for, well, almost full time for 4 years, and then sometime outside of that as well. And for the last 5 years or so, up until February this year, I was leading operations and marketing at a tech company here called Sensum, who were working on some really interesting stuff around empathic AI, that is machines and software that are aim to measure human states such as emotions and respond to those appropriately. And through that work, I got involved a lot in technology ethics, especially AI ethics, and I currently chair a global working group with the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, to develop a global standard for the ethics of empathic AI. And I'm currently in the process of trying to blend together this innovation strategy stuff with the technology ethics, particularly through a little group we've put together called Loopers. You can find out more about all of these sort of things over time. I'll give you all the links later. Just to say that I probably don't have any specific solutions for your business or your career, but I do talk to the experts, I research the space, and I try to apply modern strategy in practice, in the work that I do. And so I hope that you'll leave here with some ideas and inspiration to help find your own solutions. So here's the plan. For the next half an hour, I'm afraid you'll have to listen to me. I will share some tools and processes for innovation based on a platform that I recently launched called Neoco. And then we'll invite our panel in for the more interesting part where we'll get into a discussion. All the time, though, please don't hesitate to throw in comments and ideas and questions in particular to the chat, because we'll save those up. I probably won't respond to them while I'm talking about Neoco, but hopefully we can feed them into the discussion later. So don't be shy, and tell us who you are and who you're affiliated with if you're happy to do so. So to look at Neoco now and try to inspire some creative thinking and discussion. This is a platform that I founded earlier this year, worked on it through 2020 and to build it. Before we get into the details of the insights, though, I'll give you a quick background These sponsors came together and put together a funding call, which I applied for, covering various things in response to the COVID pandemic when it was just kicking off. But I noticed they were interested in the balance of life and work and the future of work. And this has been an area of fascination for me for a long time. So I applied for a grant and I got to do some research. To sum up the research in a single question, it would simply be, what would you say to people who are seeking better ways of working and don't want to go back to the quote unquote old normal? So off the back of this question, I ended up speaking to what I would call pioneers. These are, whether they're people or organizations or teams or whatever, who are doing interesting and novel things from all over the world. Did a lot of obviously desk-based research for online, read books and whatnot on the subject. And then I ended up collaborating with a dear old friend of mine and collaborator over here, Daryl Campbell. And together we devised an identity for this, the insights that we eventually published, which we call NeoCo. NeoCo, like neo obviously means new, and then the co part, it could mean company, collaboration, cooperation, community. The point is there's a lot of nice things beginning with CO that involve people coming together and working with each other. And I think the tagline explains what it is ultimately. It's resources for radical operations. In other words, ways to help you find better ways of working. You can go to neoco.io. It's a free site. I don't expect we'll ever be selling the content that we give away, maybe resources and whatnot, but the aim here is to give away the insights that we found free to the world. So go in there, have a look, dig a lot deeper than I'm going to get to do today because I'll only scratch the surface, and feel free to sort of steal it, amend it, send critical feedback and so on. In particular, you should see there's a toolkit there with currently around 250 odd tools that pioneers are using in their work. And then there's the playbook, which goes through the more qualitative process-oriented stuff, plays on how they do what they do. And there's also some resources there, like a library of reading and viewing material that was used for the development of the platform. And I've highlighted some of the pioneers with case studies as well. So let's get into the insights now. Obviously, this is far from comprehensive, and I invite missing items, criticism, and so on. But let's start with the tools. I won't list all the specifics. There are loads of them, but I've grouped them here according to basically what sort of broad function they serve. So within communications, there's this sort of balance at the moment between synchronous and asynchronous communication. And in particular, I would emphasize how pioneers embrace asynchronicity with things like Slack and Teams were on the ascendant before COVID hit anyway. Obviously, they're now an essential part of the business, but the good teams know when they need to respond to stuff immediately and other things when they don't need to, and they can leave work with clear communication to be picked up on the next day and so on. And then through that, they also have increasingly layered and threaded a multimedia communication. Things like discourse come packaged with video and audio as standard, and increasingly private. Signal, for instance, emphasizes its encryption levels and stuff like that. And then I won't get into video conferencing. Obviously, it's a big deal now. The likes of Zoom have become, our standard way of working. I found, though, there's a lot of video conferencing platform, software, and a lot of them seem to offer very similar features. So into more in-depth collaboration and production, we see a lot of online whiteboarding now, with apps like Miro, where people can all collaborate on a shared digital space together visually. But then taking that a step further into the idea of prototyping, tools like InVision and Figma allow you to put together a visual prototype of a thing that you want to build, or even a fully interactive one, often with minimal skills required. And then you get to pass that down the product workflow, like from product owner to designer to developer to quality control to marketing, for instance. And through that handover, it's getting increasingly seamless, where, for instance, the visual designs that are put together can be picked up by the developer immediately and don't have to be rebuilt for them to then start adding coding functions into them. And so through this as well, we're seeing a bleeding of capabilities where, say, a good developer has design skills, a good designer can write code, marketers and product owners can do a bit of everything too. And they're all working in the cloud first. So no one's keeping files on their computer that they'll never share with anybody or get stuck there. Everyone's working on the same material at the same time instantaneously. And then lastly, at the back end of that workflow, with tools like GitLab, GitHub, Webflow, and others, not only are you building your campaigns and products and such like in the cloud at the same time, but you can also instantly publish now, which is something that's been promised for decades, but it's now increasingly possible, straight to a website, for instance. On the people side of things, there's a lot going on in kind of benefits and incentives. So I gave Hey Taco here as an example. It's things like being able to give kudos to your teammates for helping you out. And then that kind of gamification process is now being tied in with things like reward structures and bonuses, and also with critical feedback. When people want to communicate their concerns to HR, all of that is that HR process is being digitized now. And we also see software for cooperative, making the operations of the business more cooperative, like Lumio is an example, where things like budgeting and decision-making can now be shared with the entire team and worked on together rather than just coming from the top down. And of course, the workforce is now increasingly distributed. Sites like Upwork allow you to bring freelancers in immediately, or in fact, entire teams when you may never even meet them. And the sites like Remote OK allow people to connect with remote jobs and live as digital nomads when they could be part of an extended company or many companies at the same time. And the Office software itself is becoming increasingly digital, even to this point of having what you might call a work OS, a work operating system. So with the basic stuff like knowledge bases, it's not just enough to have stuff written down in documentation. Now we have this more advanced kind of wiki style of constant knowledge-based management and upkeep, and people need to get good at doing documentation that makes sense to everyone else in real time when it's happening. That then gives you this bus factor. It's a crude term, but you get the idea. It's like, if I'm hit by a bus tomorrow, can someone take over my job? So increasingly we're disintermediating ourselves, and part of that partly through documentation. Thus, in doing this, the intelligence that you create is more and more widely accessible, and it's across device in real time. At the same time, what used to be basic kind of project management software and tools are now growing into these kind of work platforms and work OSs. I put Jira and ClickUp here as examples. They don't just give you tasks and a calendar and maybe a Gantt chart now. You can build anything in there, documents, media assets. You can rearrange them in any way you want. And you can make them personal down to the level of the individual team member or a team. They can fully customize how they see that. And even more so, they can even build apps, often with very little coding, for the company to use. Jira, for instance, has its own markup language where you can write apps inside it. So a slightly more technical level, looking at data design, data science, design, development. What we see with things like data science and AI, to misuse the term, and machine language and so on, is that it's becoming increasingly accessible and increasingly a skill that everybody has. So with applications like Tableau and Perceptor Labs, they make your data visual for you, whether that's for increasing your internal intelligence or for putting together marketing campaigns. And then at a slightly more advanced level, we see increasingly people looking for opportunities to automate what is currently done by a human. There's process automation. And there are tools available now that go all the way from free to very expensive. More interesting than that, though, is that often they don't require any coding. There's this kind of low to no code development revolution, should we call it. I give Zapier and Retool here as examples. There are many more, but it's the idea that now you don't necessarily need coding skills to build apps. You can build them with a visual interface, for instance, and maybe that'll automate, let's say, part of your marketing process, freeing up time for your marketing team. So this leads on to a strategic question: build or buy? We've always had to consider whether to build things for ourselves or whether to buy them in off the shelf. Well, now that which one is more efficient and effective is actually blurring a lot. And pioneers get into this sort of habit of being able to build things very quickly and very roughly, or buy stuff off the shelf, hack it together and go and go and go, maybe then even rebuilding it another time in the future, rather than trying to get it right first time. And then for those doing media production, whether that's putting together a simple campaign or something more advanced, there's so much now in terms of free and cheap licensing that you don't have to go out and produce all your own media from scratch. You can put it together yourself. Noun Project is the example I give here. Okay, so that was a very fast run through all the tools. I hope some of that made sense. Go ahead and have a look at the toolkit on Neoco if you want more, or just send me your questions. I can send you some suggestions. What we'll look at now is the plays, the processes, the patterns of behavior. And again, I don't think there's necessarily anything new here that you'll see that you don't know. But what I've done is I've pulled together what I think are the kind of key themes that these pioneering people and organizations have, have their processes under, in the hope that it might inspire your thinking. And again, if you want to dive deeper on this, the playbook part of Neoco goes through all the same kind of themes. First up, as a general point, a Neoco knows that culture eats tools for breakfast. Now, you probably know the expression from Peter Drucker, I think originally, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I just abused it here. The idea is that when I went out and asked leaders of pioneering organizations and people that inspired me, what tools and processes do you use? A lot of the time they seemed a little bit uncomfortable and hesitant, and I couldn't work out why at first. And I eventually realized it's because they started talking about their culture and their people and so on. And they were thinking culture first, tools second. Maybe that's stating the obvious, but I think as a strategic mindset that we can take, it's to worry less about the what and the which of the things that you do, and worry more about the how and the why, the sort of social stuff, interpersonal capabilities. These are the things that people call soft skills, but that can be a misleading term because ultimately they're the hard part and the bit you want to get right. Okay, so culture is king, we get it. Can we get a little more detailed into the processes themselves? So a Neoco does question every corporate norm. You look at any list of innovative companies in the world, you're likely to find the likes of Apple or Alphabet or Tesla or IBM at the top of those lists. Yes, they are prolific innovators. Yes, we can learn a lot from them. But I found the more interesting stuff was coming from those organizations that innovated at a much more subtle and deeper and more foundational level. They looked at how to innovate on the sort of subtle social stuff, like as how we seek ways to innovate on collaboration or leadership or creativity or motivation. So while work culture has changed, therefore so have the social norms that we've kind of adopted over time within the work environment. And the pioneers are unafraid to question those norms and bust through them and also create their own norms with very deliberate practice. So, choosing to change the simple little subtle ways in which people interact with each other. And one way to think about this strategically is to apply things like systems thinking and design thinking to the organization and the work itself, not just to the products and services and so on. This is a kind of process that you could call business design. A Neoco stays loosely coupled but tightly structured. So what I mean by this is that when I looked at initially at remote companies, remote first or all remote or whatever, I got a lot of inspiration from that. But looking beyond remote, we see an increasingly deeper level of decentralization, distribution, and virtualization within companies, within the tools that they use, within the way that they structure the organization, and a completely new way of thinking about your org chart. For instance, expanding beyond what would traditionally be staff and looking more at embracing a kind of membership idea, bringing in gig workers, fans, advisors, and, let's say it, your customers, get them more involved in what you do as an organization and more honestly and dynamically. And then ultimately you can ask, what is a company in the first place? And we see things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations that operate entirely on the blockchain with no leader and no office or staff or anything. And similarly, I've been involved with a few what you could call mutual aid collectives, where people just gather on the internet and agree to work on projects together because they have a similar shared interests. To achieve this, what I see a lot is they take away that those kind of social interactions that have been lost by not being in the office anymore, and then build new ones, what some people call social technologies. These are highly intentional social behaviors, deliberate practices, such as using visual communication tools cues when you're on a call, using your hands, for instance, or structured meeting processes that we learned from workshop management processes in the past. So to put this all together, there's this simultaneous decoupling where we're losing the structures that used to exist and the tightness of structures that used to exist in organizations, while at the same time, people are tightening up with tools, processes, and frameworks and these social technologies. But I don't think these two things are antagonistic. In fact, I think by tightening up on the way that people interact with each other and the kind of tooling them up with processes and frameworks and so on, you're able to let go of these legacy structures like traditional power-based hierarchies in the company or organization. Neoco has an evolving digital mindset. There's a lot wrapped under this umbrella, but there's a lot of talk these days about digital transformation. But going a step further, I think there's people call it digital mindset or digital thinking or digital DNA. It's the idea of basically reframing the way you think about your work from a kind of internet age perspective. And I've tried to sort of put these into some big buckets. And they're basically sort of 4 buckets here in 2 pairs. So first of all, iteration and evolution. Iteration is about what you might call rapid prototyping or customer discovery or product discovery or lean. There are loads of frameworks for that. But it's the idea of you build something very roughly and very rapidly, put it out in front of real people, get real feedback, measure that feedback, learn from it, build a new version, put it out again. It's this rapid feedback loop that you get into. And then through getting into a cadence and a habit of these loops, also looking to be in a state of constant evolution where you're adapting the way you act in the world all the time in response to your surrounding environment, just like nature does. And then the second pairing, frameworks and integration. The frameworks are things like, they're modern frameworks like Agile, DevOps, Lean, design systems, and so on. If they're not familiar to you, again, ask. But not only do companies, organizations use these frameworks and learn how to use them, but they also figure out how to integrate them together. They don't get stuck on one particular solution. They become solution agnostic, to use the term. So they just test, cut, remix these things to create a kind of custom portfolio that is constantly changing as well. Lastly, a Neoco is ethical to the core. I could talk all day about ethics. It's a major interest area of mine, and I work in that space. I won't get too bogged down in it here. And I think it should be obvious as well that, we should build more ethically aligned organizations. But when I went to look out for some various plays in this space, what was interesting was that it wasn't the obviously ethical companies like charities that I learned the most from. It was the ones who were doing more ethically aligned stuff in more challenging environments. And you can look at a list of most ethical companies in the world, and you'll see a lot of the same names coming up. Organizations like Patagonia and W.L. Gore, who make Gore-Tex, they come up a lot. But let's not get too fixated on specifics, because they're good at doing some ethical thing in, for instance, the clothing industry, which has got its own ethical issues as well. Or Bridgewater Associates, a fascinating company. They're a hedge fund, which to some people is, the enemy, but at the same time, they're doing some things in very innovative and interesting ways. So at the same time as not fixating on individual organizations, of course, there are many different dimensions by which we can be ethical, such as the technology processes we use, sustainability, whether that's for business sustainability or ecological sustainability, fair trading, supply chain, minimizing our footprint. It's down to you really to work out where you want to focus, which bits are more important to you and which bits will have the most impact. All I will say, though, if it isn't too obvious, is that ethics is not your marketing campaign. This has to be something that is genuine, that you and your team and the outside world believe in. But it is good marketing, and it's good recruitment too, because there's this growing community of people in the world who are more ethically savvy, they're more demanding, and they're more conscientious, and they're more aware of what's going on in the world around them, and they want to sort of, and they have more choice as well as to where they work and what products they buy. Corollary to this is that I see ethical companies and organizations as being more innovative fundamentally, and I think it's because they're not afraid. They've got the guts to choose a path and stick with it and avoid the things that they've decided are not in their scope. And in so doing, they end up taking the hard path and doing better work and being more innovative. So if you want to look for a sort of strategic approach to this, we can get a lot from what people call like human-centric processes. And I would add planet-centric there too, because people and planet obviously should be included together. But types of human-centric processes include things like user experience design and design thinking. These all do the same thing. They try and get you out of your head and into the head of your audience or stakeholders or whoever. And we've had a word for this for a very long time. It's empathy. So empathizing with your audience, your customers, or so on, helps to inform more positive and effective strategies. And thus, I think it's the master key to strategic progress of all sorts. Okay, so to wrap this up, just a couple of kind of catchy phrases that I'm offering out to you. They don't necessarily have any existence in the world at the moment, but the aim here is to nurture business operations that enable both autonomy through things like information sharing and tooling for your team, and collaboration through things like social technologies, as well as efficiency through things like automation. Ultimately, to achieve transcendent outcomes, by which I mean a change of the fundamental state of yourself or your organization into a new one, which will benefit both your people, who can be happier, healthier, more satisfied, and that's both staff, customers, audience, and so on, and the organization itself in becoming more efficient, productive, and innovative. So the game here is progressive operations, and the goal is what I call transcendent cooperation. So to finish with a quote, why not? I have adopted Maori family in my family over in New Zealand. I'm not going to attempt the original language here, but in English, the translation of this kind of popular Maori proverb is, what is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. Thank you. We shall now move on to our panel. Just while I get the panel set up here, if you want to get yourself coffee or whatever, go for it. We will get stuck straight in though. We won't take a proper pause. As I said before, please don't hesitate to put comments and questions in here, especially now if you have questions that you want the panelists to address. For instance, what has been the biggest concern or issue for you since COVID hit in terms of your work? Let us know. Now let's just see if I can get to my participant list. I can, attendees. All right, so give me a moment while I promote my attendees to panelists. And I'll call in one of our panelists here. Okay. I see Fiona's on screen. There's Michael and Crystal, you're there as well. I don't see you yet, but you've popped your, oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi.
You should be able to unmute yourselves at any time if you wish to.
Hello, everyone.
Brilliant.
Nice things.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
To explain, I have Ed Morgan from DisplayNote here in the room with us, and I'll stop sharing screen sharing in a moment. But first of all, let me introduce the panelists. Okay, so first up, Michael Torrance is an industrial designer turned design innovation consultant who is always looking for ways to unlock the creativity in others. He's worked as a designer across a range of industries, from special needs postural care to architectural lighting to design thinking facilitation. He currently focuses on creating exceptional legacies for the world's biggest companies at Accenture's Global Innovation Hub, the DOC, by driving human-centric design and experimentation approaches to solve their most complex problems. Christelle Miller is a reader in strategy and innovation at Ulster University. She is also a director of Innovation Ulster Limited. Her expertise is within the areas of business models, innovation management, university industry knowledge transfer, technology commercialization, and competitiveness. She has presented her work in international conferences and published in books and internationally recognized journals. Christelle is the co-editor of the Irish Journal of Management and an expert advisor and reviewer of the European Commission and the Economic and Social Research Council. Christelle also works with organizations to help them develop their innovative capabilities and grow. Ed Morgan, sitting across from me, is Chief Operating Officer at DisplayNote, a technology company that creates connected experiences for the world's presenters, educators, and learners, and from whose office we're in right now. Working across all areas of the business, from strategy to product, commercial engineering, and all in between, Ed's main focus is figuring out what are the most important things to build and ensuring everyone at the team knows why they are the most important. And lastly, Fiona Bennington is an award-winning product design engineer and entrepreneur with a keen interest in the power of design to improve lives. She has designed products from NGOs such as Oxfam for disaster relief, animal rescue, worked with Lecky to develop products to enhance the lives of kids with special needs, and Snuggle to create lines of products for new parents. She is the director of Hero Shield Limited, a not-for-profit consortium developed to rapidly and locally produce PPE in response to the early stages of the pandemic, launched her own product, Hug Wearable Heat Pack, and runs design consultancy Newly Design based in Belfast. She now sits as the head of entrepreneurship and growth at Catalyst Inc. to provide support and advice for new startups and entrepreneurs who wish to make their ideas a reality. And it is an absolute pleasure to have you all here. If I stop sharing, hopefully, yes, we're all together. So guys, I'll open up to the floor for anyone to respond, any of you to respond here. With a sort of very general first question, bring up my questions, which is, what is the future of work? That term, when somebody mentions future of work, what does it inspire in you, and what does it make you think about? Go for it.
I can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Nick.
Super. Well, I think for me, and from some research that we did recently, the big thing that jumped out for me about thinking about the future, the most significant thing might be, and it might be just because we just had our second baby in the house here, but it's balance, and it's people reassessing what's most important in their lives, what's most important in their career. People realizing now that they don't have to be late for work at 8:30 a.m. That they can spend more time with their kids than maybe 25 minutes a day, that in our business, they don't have to spend 30% of their week in an airport lounge. So really it's about seeing people, and also maybe not being financially punished for needing to live close to the office. So yeah, it's that idea of reassessment, rebalancing. We've obviously seen the great resignation across the planet, and people are just taking some time to think about what's most important for them. And I think for business, that means what's the offering that attracts those now floating bodies who are looking for their next adventure into your own business. We've seen obviously a lot of the big players in the world, some of the big tech companies have taken that experimental mindset to keeping their people and attracting new people. And I think that's just the key for the future of work, is not being afraid to get it wrong in the early stages, experimenting and using it as a new opportunity to maybe redefine how you attract people or how you do what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Very good, thank you. I suggest actually if everyone mutes when they're not speaking, it doesn't matter too much, but just in case the Zoom grabs their attention, I'll try to do the same so we don't get a feedback loop. Yeah. Ed, were you?
Yeah, just chiming in or echoing some of what Mick said. I think a quote springs to mind and probably well worn out at this stage. You know, the Russian leader Vladimir Lenin said there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And from the last 18 months, things have just changed so much. Being in the business that we're in, which is all around collaboration, remote sharing, connectivity, we kind of paid lip service a bit to the future of work and how this was going to change, but we were looking at decades out, and it's just changed irreversibly over the last 18 months. I think it's and I don't think it will change back. It's you've gone from when you go from a £7 bottle of wine to a £9 bottle of wine or £10 bottle of wine, you don't go back.
You don't go back.
Okay, this is the standard now. And I think it's like you just overhear conversations at work, in the canteen, just out and about, the same conversation over and over. How many days a week are you going into the office? What's the blend like? How's it working for you? And I'm pretty sure if you took a straw poll here, you probably find a kind of line of best fit is, yeah, I'll come into the office a couple of days because I miss the social interaction and I miss the people aspect. But I also really love, again, what Mick said is just, I don't have to be up at 8:30. I don't have to, there's less of the vanity metrics of kind of busyness metrics of, oh yeah, there's the guy and he's walking around, the office with a folder on his arm really quickly. Gee, he must be busy. That is all gone. It's like, work is now what you do, not where you are. So we like many others, are just still, even being in this industry so much, we're still grappling with, well, why would anyone want to come into the office? What are we offering people to come into the office? Do we want them to absolutely come in? And if they do come in, what does that feel like? Are they going to come in and do all of the stuff that they can already do, that kind of individual work? Probably not, because that barrier has just been busted down. We know that our teams can do that individual work at home and do it far better. No distraction, go at their own pace. They know what work needs to be done. So whether they want to get up at 4 a.m., or they want to just do it normal working hours, or if they, just life, if they want to do it later in the day, they can do it. So now us as a team, as a management team, have to explain what does this whole thing look like? Why come in here? And again, just echo some of what Micah said, we're kind of experimenting, feeling our way through it, both on the process side, on the kind of softer cultural side, and even on the tech side. We're still trying to grapple with meetings like this when you've got an audience all around the world, and you've got people in the room. And I kid you not, even though we're in the industry, we're still doing things like this. And I'll just show you very quickly. We're still setting our cameras up on bins. And you know what? It's one of the best pieces of kit we have.
Yeah,
because it tilts and zooms. So feel free to just experiment, work. No one has a playbook here at all. Maybe we'll all have the playbook 10 years from now when we go, yeah, we did that. This is step 1, 2, and 3. But for now, it's who can see furthest in the fog, and that's really what our approach.
I'll turn this to Fiona or Crystal, just because you haven't spoken, but by all means we can move on to another.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with everything that's been said so far. I definitely think we're about to tip the balance on a real shift change in work. And people are definitely reconsidering the activity that they spend the majority of their lives on. There's been a massive sea change in people kind of leaving careers and moving to new roles. And I think part of the pandemic has caused people to pause and reflect on what they're doing with their lives. Maybe it's the reality of mortality hitting us quite hard on top of the working from home situation. But I think Michael is right. People are trying to find a better balance to see their family and to do the things that they love on top of work. And what's happened has enabled us to find a way to do that. But I think this was probably already going to happen. I think COVID has just accelerated it. This is an emergency response to something that was already, in my mind, inevitable, but was probably going to take us 5 or 10 years to get to that place. I think we've achieved it in more like 2 or 3 now. We are already seeing more companies hiring almost entirely remote now, and I think this is really interesting. People have learned, because they've been forced to trust their teams to work on their own time frame in their own location. And I foresee a shift of more people being able to create more remote work for themselves too. So aside from working for companies, to be able to become entrepreneurs in a global sense, because access to the finance for that and the opportunities for that are now so much easier. It used to be the case that you'd probably have to jump on a plane to several different countries to go and see investors or to seek out opportunities, and that just wasn't something that was feasible for someone in their day job. So I feel like with respect to our Catalyst programs and things, we're seeing a massive influx of people who are interested in going their own way. So it's a really interesting time. The change is still live. It's definitely still happening. But I think a lot of it is in the favor of the ordinary person, and that's what excites me about it.
I suppose, yeah, I'll just add to that. It's all the things. I suppose I often jump down the term digital transformation when if someone says future of work, and not the digital transformation of the company, but of society overall, whereby we have to look at how society is completely being transformed by technology and the impact that is going to have on organizations. And I think for an organization, it's going to lead to a lot of the different forms that, Mick and Fiona and everyone has been talking about there, but also will lead to, as you mentioned, the human side of work, whereby it's that balance of using technology to allow that, but then also recognizing that your consumption patterns and behaviors is going to change as well, which is going to dictate new business models that organizations are going to have to transform into. But yeah, I'm sure we're going to delve into some of those, maybe with some of the other questions before I start to unpick them.
Well, yes, indeed. Let's try to do that a little bit. So maybe I can ask about what you've seen, either from your own work or from sort of looking, researching this sort of space that you see. What changes have occurred? Like, what are the kind of big changes, or there could be subtle things as well that you think might also be additional to what we've discussed in terms of like the future of work?
Yeah, well, I suppose it really varies across sectors and organizational types, obviously size of firm and things like that we have to look into. But I suppose some of the key trends that we're seeing in organizations is, especially with COVID, is a focus more looking at agility and resilience, and that's almost looking away from roles in organizations and more looking at capabilities of employees and how employee capabilities is helping achieve the organization's goals. Therefore, there's going to be a lot more focus on having more flexible skills in organizations, so that if your role, for instance, does become obsolete for whatever reason, then you have that flexibility in the organization still to contribute or even to move into new roles. So I think there's a real shift in regards to how we view skills and roles in organizations. And I think also, we touched upon it as well there, like there's a lot of people who, are really rethinking work and the purpose of organizations. So a lot of organizations now are really having to tease out what is their purpose a lot more. So purpose in terms of how they maybe are contributing to, society, or purpose in regards to, how they're able to tackle some sustainable development goals, but also then trying to communicate that to employees, because employees really are a bit at the forefront at the moment because of everything we talked about. Everyone is rethinking, their life, what they want out of work. And I think a lot of organizations now really are starting to have to look at these things a lot more and really look at employees' well-being and beyond like financial metrics, and think, how they can contribute towards the employees' goals, as well as obviously balancing that with the organizational goals.
Very good, thank you. And by all means, jump in, anybody.
Yeah, again, maybe just add to that. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what has been said. For us, just some practical examples of some of the things that we're now thinking about that we weren't thinking about, or certainly thinking about as much, is I think Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat. It was about 10 years ago. It was all about kind of globalization, and it's just easy now. Supply chains can come from anywhere. But now, in terms of talent acquisition, the world is flatter than ever before. So anyone from anywhere could join and work reasonably well for any company. In fact, you see a lot of the bigger players are just offering pay parity. The Spotify's of the world are just saying, we don't care where you come from, what your bills are, we're going to give you the same whether you're on the West Coast or if you're in Eastern Europe or Asia. So we're having to do, we're having to think of things that, we know that for the talent that we want to get, we would definitely not be as attractive on the face of it to the Spotify's of the world. So we're really having to think about why actually come and work with us. We're now not just selling our products to our customers and solving problems for our customers, but we now have to think all the time about, I was chatting to you, Ben, about we have to tell our story just as much to our team. Here is why, here's our purpose. And if we do, here's the difference that we're making to the world, to our users. And we're now having to find, we're telling that story as much as, hey, this product's great. If you do it, it'll solve X, Y, and Z problems. So
I think just to highlight something, because when Ed and I were talking about this before, was about in telling that story, partly it's about trying to get things like customer wins into the minds of people like developers who may never even see these customers and communicate with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just things that, and I guess because our ears are open to this now, it's any information that's coming into the company is like, what can we, how is this useful to us as a company? So take a case study that we did, a customer case study that we did 2 years ago versus now. 2 years ago, would have been, here's a great case study. Let's use that case study to go and drive more business. Let's use it as a beachhead. Look, similar companies, look what we have done. Isn't this great? Which it is great. Come and buy our products. But now we're saying, we're doing that as well. But now we're looking at our team going, look, guys, we spoke to a customer. This is the feedback that they're giving us on the things that you have created, the things that you have been working hard over the last 2-3 months. Look at the difference it's making. Now, arguably, you would have think, well, why weren't you doing that anyway? Because that's just a no-brainer. But I think just now, because the people side of the business is just as important as the product side of the business and the engineering and the sales, the marketing, the people side is just important. We're now thinking and doing here's how we're all making a difference. So we've kind of just changed a bit of a mind shift. It seems like a no-brainer to do this, but it's not till you do it, you realize.
I think that beautifully underlines the point that I was making about the shift of the power, perhaps, to more of the ordinary people. So it's not just it's become the situation where companies have to sell themselves to employees because talent have the option to work internationally remotely. The job opportunities, maybe the doors have flown open, or perhaps people are reconsidering the career and they're taking a bit of a break in order to do that. So they're looking for the right job rather than any job. And I think furlough has facilitated that to some extent for some people, like some thinking space. It's really interesting. So that's, on one hand, people have the power with respect to selecting the right company for them, and companies are having to make an argument for A, people to join them, and B, to get them into the workplace. So I think there's some interesting stuff around that. We also will probably find that we redesign our workspaces in the near future. Our offices are more or less designed for solo work, and if we are encouraging people to come into the office, it will mainly be for collaborative work. So I think we might see more offices becoming more like coffee shop scenarios, where people are encouraged to get together. I mean, it's around the coffee machine or the water cooler famously where the ideas happen, not in the board meeting. So that's probably what we want to facilitate in the future. So that's the first point, the power of the people with respect to hiring. And the second thing that we're seeing, which is really interesting, is the power of the people in the startup scenario, because it used to be the case that you would be begging investors for money, and that's starting to tilt shift. We're starting to see the other way around happening, where there's a lot of demand from investors looking for good startups, and not a lot of startups, ready to receive that. So we're starting to see a change in shift there as well, where it used to be the case that you would pander to the investors, and now that's going the other way. So this is kind of what I'm trying to get at with my point. I think this cultural change is maybe placing more emphasis on the importance of our population, our people, and giving them more power as well to make choices that are good for their lives and their livelihoods and their families.
I totally agree with that, and bringing it back to the point also mentioned, I think Spotify our kind of cultural leaders. They have their, work from anywhere in the world offer for their people. But in research we've done, even with these fantastic offerings, the key thing is that no one has nailed this yet, because as Fiona mentioned, this is all still happening. We're still in the big experiment. And there's still plenty of opportunity to go after. One thing in terms of people that we saw was autonomy, and autonomy is going to be a big thing for companies to reckon with and manage. So as we mentioned before, some people have gone into working from home and have just replicated the 9 to 5, but in their house, and they shut the door and they can keep the family out and they can focus on their tasks, and they don't do the washing during the day and everything else. They just do their work. But there's a lot of other people who are getting up earlier to spend time with their kids, starting work later, working in ad hoc chunks throughout the day, maybe doing some work on the weekend because it suits them to spend more time with family. A lot of people are reinvesting in themselves in terms of their own education, their health. We're in a pandemic. So again, there's been a refocus on that. But these are people who have fairly significantly altered their working week, and it works for them in work from home. But as we return, as we most likely all will and are doing currently, to a hybrid scenario, there's the need of the individual and then there's the need of the team. So managers are going to have to manage that. Yes, there's a certain level of autonomy to keep this person, in flow and obviously keep them in the business, but at the same time, that has to be managed with, they work in a team. What are the days in the office? What are the days at home? Who's moved down the country or out of the country? And these kind of things. That obviously poses a lot of questions for companies to get that right. But certainly this desire for more autonomy, trust, we've all proven in the pandemic, as mentioned before, that we can do this, and we can, productivity has gone through the roof. We also, as we return to the office, we have to prepare ourselves, and our bosses all have to get ready for that level of productivity to potentially take a bit of a dip. Because I know when I've gone into the office for our brainstorming sessions and our kind of design and experimentation sessions, the talking you do when you finally get face to face with people again, like I come back to my emails and they're through the roof because I haven't been ready to answer them at a moment's notice. So I think that's all important stuff to consider. But, as we go forward, as businesses go forward, how do we, help people potentially cherry pick new benefits to keep them happy, or to think about, what's their new job description that they form for themselves? How do you give people new forms of autonomy to kind of help them feel like they're still in full control of their own careers, even when we're potentially, the business is clawing back a bit more control as they start coming back to the office? And as mentioned, as was mentioned earlier, how do we give people that sense of their own new role, that they can run themselves, or working as teams rather than specific roles, these kind of things. So I think there's a lot of different ways that can be approached, And I think it's pretty exciting for businesses to start to think about.
We'll say just quickly, if anyone's listening in and there's something bugging you that you'd like to ask, please do comment in the chat feed. Otherwise, we will just keep talking. So do by all means, ask questions, even if it's specific to your own organization, or your own situation, because it's good. People can always reflect on practical solutions like that. Does anyone have any thoughts they want to share in, or I can keep going? But if you have anything you want to say,
just love to hear how Mick manages to keep people out of his home office. He mentioned that some people are able to shut the door and keep everyone else away. I'd love to know how to do that. It feels like a bit of a zoo at times.
Okay, so as a thought, like one of the things that seems to be coming out of this, which maybe we can pick up on, is between being entirely remote, and there are organizations that have been remote first or remote that were around long before COVID was here. The likes of GitLab, we were talking about them just yesterday, who've written playbooks on this stuff before it was the default, through to like fully co-located in-house. Let's say you're serving in a restaurant, for instance. That's something that we can't currently do remotely. And then in between that, there's hybrid. Does anyone have any thoughts about where the kind of pinch points are between, what's the best sort of setup, both in terms of the actual structure of the office, or in terms of how people spend their time, for instance, between remote and in-house?
I think it all depends on people's situations. We've got people in our team who have physically moved down the country, so it's going to be a lot more work for them to come in. The way we work in our teams is we're working very well remotely. We're using all the tools that you alluded to at the start, you know, and I think the planet has become experts, or certainly the office folk have become experts in using them. What we do find is working well is for certain types of events, kickoffs, team kickoffs, ideation sessions, these kind of things, to allow for a full day in the office for that, and to kind of almost make an event of that. What that also does is it brings more people back into our office. Our offices are open for booking desks, but it's a bit of a ghost town, you know, so you kind of need to build that momentum to get to that, what looks like hybrid, where there are more people in the office, because a lot of people are still at home. But I think it is a mix, and it's a case of using all of those digital tools well and adopting some of those agile methodologies that not all teams use, but get the ones that work for you. And I suppose it's just getting that team set up out of the gate for success, so that roles and responsibilities are clear. And this is for us in our teams switch and change regularly, so we kind of have to do that reset at the start every time. And you get the best of me, you get the worst of me. Let's understand each other, and let's understand what timetables are and how we best work together. And we've started putting that in our email sign-offs. You know, by the way, I'm a parent who picks up my kids at 4:30. You'll catch me from maybe 7:30 for 30 minutes afterwards instead. So we're just trying to be as open and honest with ourselves, our clients, everyone else. And it's actually been, the response has been great. You know, where when someone's kids come running into the room on a call, clients are happy. Then you seem more human, all that kind of stuff. So I found people's acceptance of all these new family-based and work-based meldings is on the whole a positive.
Kind of reminds me of, I remember, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, we went to pitch some business in Norway, and the guy we were pitching to, who really wanted his business, had his baby in the office and just changed the nappy, changed the diaper just in the meeting space. I mean, literally on the table, and no one batted an eyelid. And I think my mind was like, oh my God, this is just so alien. Imagine doing this back in Ireland or back in Belfast. They would take one look at you and go, this guy's lost the plot. We're now actually closer to that. You did right. Like that, things like that are just kind of, okay, this person is human. This is their life. You know, I'm maybe chatting to them here, but they've got a whole other situation going on, just like I do. And it's funny that just sprung to mind. One thing that we've been doing, and you guys will know this just from I guess the day-to-day of maybe software companies, we still have our daily meetings and just checking in on what's going on. You know, anything in the way, what are we working on? But what we do every quarter now is take probably 3 or 4 days to set context, purpose, you know, from the management team, from leaders. Why are we actually doing this? What's good about it? What are we winning at? What are the priorities? What's not priorities? What should we press acceleration on versus let go? And we try and do, you know, our cadence for that is every quarter, so that for the quarter, then if everyone has a good understanding of this is important versus this is not important, then the day-to-day, you know, I wouldn't say it looks after itself, but it's certainly more plain sailing, because everyone's clear of, okay, this is the direction we're going in, and this is what's important, and I have a good understanding of why it's important. The tools they use, the locations they're in, you know, I wouldn't say is not important, but certainly becomes secondary to that, you know, the overall context. And I think the more we can do that and set context, the better it is. And again, it's not starting to rip out the cliches, but you know, it's, you know, giving people that love of swimming and telling them, look, this is the general direction we're going in. How you guys get there and what you build and how you do it, and that's up to you. You're very talented individuals, but it's our job to say this is where we're going generally, and this is why we're going, and give that importance to it.
I think for me and companies I speak to, it's very context specific in regards to the types of teams, and a bit like what has been discussed, you have to get to know the type of employee. Whilst, you know, I do love hybrid and you know, doing things online, if, you know, within research or even meeting businesses, you can't beat, meeting people in person. And I think like relationship forming, is a lot stronger in person. So I think it's the organization really needs to take a look and reflect really regularly in regards to the different forums and whether they are working, and embed that into employees' reflection as well in regards to what may be working and what may not. So for instance, I know like across Northern Ireland, a lot of business networking events are now hosted online, which is great for people who know each other. Like if I know people, I have, the best networking event online, but if I'm trying to meet new people, and yeah, by all means, I'll speak to people, but will I forge that really good relationship? Perhaps not. So then it's maybe then thinking about replacing, if you're doing perhaps a lot of work online within your teams, then maybe have more social events where, a bit like what you'd say, Mick, if you go into the office, it turns into a social event, instead of a day of being productive. Whereas then if if people prefer to work from home, let them, but then embed those social events as separate things where, yes, you may end up discussing some things to do with work, but it's largely social and you get that bond inside, and then everyone can be more efficient whenever you're actually working remotely.
I'll just pick up on that quickly and think, like I mentioned earlier, about the idea of using so-called social technologies like visual cues and very deliberate practices to try and help people work together. And I've been amazed when I've gone onto workshops online with people who actually do that kind of thing for a living, to help organizations to be more cooperative and whatnot. And they have all these different tricks for kind of like icebreakers that you'd have at a networking event, but more, sort of the digital versions of those. So what I'm hearing here is that you could bundle this all into rituals. Basically, we are social creatures. We have rituals that we use for all sorts of things, and a lot of things we don't really think about as rituals, like the entire kind of office world is a series of rituals and norms that we just kind of accept, and they all need to be rewritten now. So whether that's in person or online, I guess don't be afraid to generate your own new rituals. I'll pick up a question here from the chat. Andy shared a question here. Maybe we can speak to this. And this points to, I'll read it out. So it says, I'd be interested to know your views on how best to manage communication with employees, where some roles may lend itself better to a fully remote or hybrid role, and others, such as facilities or front of house staff, are obviously in person. So how do we best manage that disparity? Does anyone wish to just kind of pick up on that with any ideas?
I'd like to touch on the communication point. I think that's really interesting, Andy, because I think even before the pandemic, when people were in person, communication might have been the one thing that most companies would have said that was a challenge to them. So I don't think necessarily that communication is a hybrid. It is partially a hybrid issue, but I think it has always been a challenge for companies to manage that. How do we stay connected to all of our teams and aware whenever somebody has a problem? So I think we have introduced, like Michael was touching on there, a lot of tools to stay connected to each other in a more leveling way with the whole team. That has been really helpful. It's definitely still, like I said, with everything else, a work in progress, but the likes of using to set email aside a little bit and to use more like direct chat systems has been really helpful for the majority of teams, because even if you can't get back to it immediately, it allows groups to ask each other questions rather than necessarily going directly to a manager who then has to file that off to someone else. So, and also it takes 2 seconds to write a quick message to someone, and it probably takes 10 minutes to write what we consider to be an email that is the right format in our business environment. So I think that has been extremely helpful, and I'm interested to see what other people suggest with respect to this, because I don't know if anyone has perfectly solved the communication problem.
I wouldn't say that we've perfectly solved it either. It's always been a problem, and I think I've chatted to you. When you look at all problems at a business, they all usually boil down to communication, and that's usually at the core of it. I have found, actually, because we are now more distributed as a team, that kind of that crutch or safety net, I think you touched on, where you catch up, most of the work is done at the water cooler, and that's where you can hear things, or did you see this, or have you, is this on your radar? That's almost kind of disappeared a little. So for me, some of the guys at the team here, because that crutch is gone, we have to spend more time thinking about what we communicated and how we communicated, so that it's not getting lost in translation, so that you're not getting lots of communication back to you. What does this mean, or what's the context here? So we have to think about, actually, if I'm sitting down to write a document or a process or a user story or whatever, I'm almost thinking now there may not be any safety net of catching something that I may have missed. So I have to really think about what it is we're trying to get across at the start, as opposed to, oh, well, I'm sure we'll find that out at some point. So and maybe that's just something of my own previous way of working, where I was thinking, yeah, there's a team here, we'll catch up, I'm chatting to them every day. Between us, we'll get to where we need to get to. That's now kind of gone, where we have to think about it at the start. So that's just a little bit of a change, a tweak.
I see. There's a comment here, more so than a question, from Owen Crozier in the chat that says they've just come off a group call with all these different people involved in it. And what's interesting is that it's not alien anymore, right? This future of work. The future of work is actually the now of work, isn't it? Right? We're already we've been thrust into the future. So it is interesting to recognize that these things are becoming not accepted as norms. Just like, as somebody mentioned earlier, like, you see someone who is your boss, and used to see them in a suit every day. Well, now you see them on the Zoom call and they've got a cat in the head and kids pulling at their legs. And they're wearing their pajama bottoms under the desk there, and that's okay, because these are real people, and so are we, and that sort of levels the playing field, which I think is one of the things that's coming across here. Okay, so maybe we can start to. I don't want to lead this too much, because you might well have things that are already in your heads that you want to share. So I'll let you sort of jump in and derail it. But just as a prompt here, maybe we can start to paint a picture of what future organizations are likely to look like in terms of their structure, what processes or tools they use, what kind of products or what kind of new business models are going to look like, and how business models can be innovated on, and or which examples you've already seen in the world. These are the ones I call the pioneers. And when I did my research for Neoco and I asked who are the pioneers, one of the things I found really interesting is that some people came back with stuff like individuals, or they were talking about people working in restaurants down the road who would manage to redesign the restaurant for social distancing and done takeaways. And they were like, I was thinking like pioneers for the likes of your GitLab or your Tesla, but actually they're all around us, these people we can learn from, and we can adapt those processes into ourselves. So does anything spring to mind when I talk about that kind of like future organization, pioneering organization?
I wouldn't have I think the tools we're using and the structures are obviously going to be specific to the businesses. But when I think about the future of, say, innovative businesses, or how businesses need to be innovative, I think flexibility is a non-negotiable going forward. I think we are just all now flexible. I think that's just written into the rule book, given what we've all gone through. Digital transformations for every business under the sun, new drug and product creation in fractions of the time it took before, HR policy revolutions going on, massive change across the board. I think the question for a lot of businesses is, how can you harness that fire that happened across all businesses, that speed, not to have it turned on all the time, because that's burnout. And I don't think Pfizer would operate at the speed it operated to get the drugs out all the time, because that's just flying with all cylinders pumping. I think it's a question of understanding how we adapted so well as businesses, bottling it and working out how we can break that out when needed. That's part of what we try to do with clients, is help them access that part of their brain or company that allows them to do that. For us, the big change we saw with businesses was, and I'm sure everyone on the call is seeing, is that before the pandemic, innovation a lot of the time was the box tick. I need to go do innovation because we have a budget, and the innovation theater kicks in. The biggest change we're seeing is just the laser focus now from clients, is that they are coming with questions they actually need answered, with opportunities that have bubbled up from either the pandemic or the realization that they need change. And that's been a massive change in terms of their mindsets, their focus, what they want to get done, their objectives. So overall, I just think that this is the big experiment, and the mindset for experimentation, for rapid, scrappy testing, user research, user testing, prototyping, building, just getting into that cycle of doing, is one of the biggest things that businesses, I think, can take from this and move forward, and just know that the world could change again tomorrow. So that flexibility and adaptation is going to be key to all of us, really.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that theme and say that I was very lucky to go and visit with MIT last week, and there were several themes with respect to the future of work after COVID now, and one of them was kind of, I suppose, what Michael's describing there, what they termed to be anti-fragility in the business context. So that's whenever there's a massive disruption, treating it as an opportunity rather than something that we just like as a hurdle that we have to get over, and companies setting themselves up in such a ways where they're agile enough to take advantage of those things. So like we said, empowering your workforce to make free decisions and to find creative solutions to things. So that was a real theme, that anti-fragility piece. And I think looking, if we think 10 years from now, what the future of work might look like as a response to everything that's happened here and everything that's probably going to happen anyway, I think we might see, and I touched on different workspaces earlier, but I think we might see a complete change in where people work collaboratively. I think there may be a demand for spaces, maybe like the restaurant or the cafe, that are designed as, you know, maybe businesses don't own a premises anymore, maybe they don't rent a premises, and maybe they don't even share co-working space. I imagine that there might be completely new spaces appearing where you can go and collaborate with people, and for them not to be so private. We've seen a definite shift in Catalyst from when our buildings were built, people wanting very private office space, to we're moving to more collaborative, and that has been happening in the last 10 years or so, and I think that's only going to accelerate. So I don't know what that space will look like, but it'll be really interesting if they weren't dedicated to one business or another, and that would help to facilitate cross-pollination of ideas from different people in different industries, and that we would all be more accepting of that as a premise, and, you know, less private about the things that we're working on, and more collaborative because of the spaces that we're in. It could be really interesting. One final point on the anti-fragility thing, MIT pointed out that that speed of change is not going to stop or slow, and if businesses that attempt to pull people back into the old way of things are probably not going to succeed. We have to be open to changing our mindset, our way of thinking, and our way of working, because everything will only accelerate. So like everything Mick said about those iterative processes, learning how to work fast and intelligently as well, making decisions very quickly off the back of real data, will be critical to people's survival in business in the future.
I suppose I want to just touch on, I suppose, at a more higher level, in regards to looking at, you know, future maybe new businesses developing, or what business models might look like. So if we take like the traditional way of looking at a business model, you know, a lot of people will be aware of the business model canvas, which has aspects linked to like revenue and profit, whereas a bit like what I'd said earlier, you know, the purpose side I think is going to become really key, and we're already seeing a lot of businesses, new businesses now developing, which have like shared value as part of their core value proposition that they're putting forward. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, they have to be social enterprises and not for profit. It's very much along the lines of looking at, you know, profit generating businesses that's helping contribute to these sustainable development goals. And, you know, that for me is really, you know, the key to help, you know, everyone. So the key to business sustainability in regards to their longevity and being able to remain competitive, they have to look at things like the environment, you know, things that's going on in society in regards to skills development, deprivation, you know, very social issues that are impacting maybe the employees, you know, that they're going to have, their ability to get good quality workforce. Therefore, you know, there's a lot of like really creative businesses, you know, coming out. Like there's, I suppose the list is endless. I came across, you know, one the other day, which I think was called like Shared Time in the UK, and it's about helping tackle loneliness in elderly people, and advancing cooking skills in young people. So that sort of matchmaking of people, which is, you know, obviously a business. It's a new business model. Then also we know there's a lot of businesses out there in regards to like food waste and helping with that side of things. But you know, there's loads of examples in regards to these types of new businesses where there's so many opportunities. I think it's very exciting, you know, whenever we look at the opportunities that both technology can have, but also the opportunities to think of things you're passionate about, of how we can make, you know, society better for us all, but, you know, develop business ideas linked to that.
Just to feed in a comment here, and I'll invite the panel to, if anyone has any thoughts they want to add, you know, rather than changing the subject necessarily. But when I went out and spoke to a lot of people, I found that one thing that got repeated a lot was my company, whether it was the company they were running or they were talking about the people who employed them, we thought that it wasn't possible to work remotely. I've experienced this myself. We were told, you know, it doesn't work. We've tried it. I often heard that. We've tried it. And then it happened, and then everything was okay. And then the statistics, from what I understand, actually showed that things like productivity went up. It wasn't just that people were feeling more comfortable. And we should also recognize that there's been a hell of a lot of negative effects as well for people. I've spoken to people whose lives have been completely ruined in many ways, like including, for instance, a professor I spoke to who has always worked from home, but suddenly they had to do the childcare. They had basically it's homeschooling and all the rest of it. But we certainly can talk about the negative stuff, and I wouldn't want to leave it out. But to look at the more positive side, I think to generalize that point about how it was like we thought we couldn't do it, then we realized we could. And just as when you mentioned things like completely novel business models, or like, as I mentioned earlier, whole new ways of organizing where you don't even have a company, for instance, you just have some kind of entity online, and it could even be on the blockchain, therefore it's not even owned by anyone, it's just on some ledger. Mm-hmm. The point to generalize here is questioning the very fundamentals. So where you think you might be struggling as a business, it might be because you're thinking of your business in a way that doesn't need to be thought about anymore, if that makes sense. And collaboration and networks certainly seem to be a big part of this. So I don't know if that fuels any thoughts for anybody.
Yeah, I think you can take the negative, and there's been a planet full of it. We've all gone through it, and obviously use that in any pain point to work out where to next. In the research we did across North America and Europe, in terms of just how were people experiencing working from home from an office white collar perspective, one of the main things we saw was the negative impact it had specifically on women. So women were incurring more of the work from home burden and less of the work from home benefits than men were. Men were returning to the office sometimes sooner, taking more risk. Women were, basically being left to run their business, the daycare, the home, everything, while some partners returned to the office. And we were using this to think about what are the unintended consequences? What's the long-term negative effects on what's already a significant gap in terms of wages and professional progress? And really what it got us thinking about was, if you do decide to work from home as your business may allow, and which is your right, what is the work from home but be seen approach or package or bundle, so is that you aren't overlooked because you're not in the eye line of the boss every day, like the 25-year-old who is in the office, who doesn't have to juggle childcare and everything else? Are you only assessed by people who are also in a remote or hybrid situation? So it was really starting to look at what are some of those negative things were in specifically gender imbalance that could propagate even worse in a hybrid world, and how do we get businesses to start thinking about how do we get out ahead of this and stop this before it becomes a problem. We've had a couple of hybrid big management meetings when the people who dialed in for 3 hours did not get the same benefits, did not get the same enjoyment, found it to be a real drag. That's just personal, that's just their personal experience. But in terms of a professional sense, how do you not get looked over by not being in the office? How do you not get ignored because your voice isn't coming directly, your voice is coming directly out of a computer? So these are some of the things we try to think about for future proofing against some of the bigger negative effects.
Sorry, go ahead.
We talked about that just I think yesterday or whatever day it was. This hybrid working, take this as an example. You've got a virtual audience, all dotted, an individual, and you've got a team in here. Now, when this session ends, Ben and I can communicate, and we can communicate in the office, and we could just have a totally different conversation. We could start to go, do you know what? What a waste of time. Those guys are just, talking nonsense. Here's what we should do. And if I'm sitting with the power, wherever the power is coming from, I've got there's a, if you touch something, I can influence. And someone sitting remote who's virtual, and the company promote a hybrid policy, you would be thinking, well, what am I missing out on? I know hybrid working is promoted and talked about, but look, I guarantee you for a second, that those guys in there are probably following on different ideas, going to push a project in a direction. And I know there's a fear sometimes of, well, I should be in there, but I can't be in there, and I don't want to be in there because I don't need to be in there. But how do I not miss out? How am I sure that if I am working from home, and I will be working from home, that I've got the same opportunities, I've got the same platform to advance my ideas, advance projects, as those that may just happen to be in office for a couple of days for whatever reason.
Just to quickly comment, I've heard some people saying that you can either have everyone on the call or everyone in the room, which of course we're breaching here in itself, but we're kind of aware of that. And I think that's not necessarily a fixed rule, but I think it gets to the point. I also think maybe like I've been on calls recently where there's been a series of, I mentioned them earlier, like hand signals, for instance, like this thing, twinkle fingers, which I love. Basically, when a call's going on, it's basically just saying like, I'm with you, I hear you, or just wrap, you can't, you're on mute, or like wrap it up, I can't remember that maybe, but you end up with this sort of new forms of communication. But I think that people are afraid to do those things if they're embarrassed because they're not used to it. So you as a leader, you kind of need to break the ice in the first place. By all means, if anyone wants to jump on that. Otherwise, I'm tempted to look at what's just been discussed in the chat there about this idea of like, Fiona, if you want to pick up on this, this idea of like the new model for work for the individual that might be more of a kind of portfolio than it is necessarily working for an individual company.
Yeah, it's interesting that a couple of people have said that they've seen this happening. I don't know how we describe this or how it's structured, but it is already occurring. And I would fall into this, and I wonder how many other people on the panel have done this, where they've had several jobs. You see, there you go. Where they've had several jobs all at once. So I think, given the way things have changed, there's been opportunities for people to go part-time in their current roles, for example, and that leaves you with part of the week to consider what kind of projects. I'm trying to describe how I see this happening, what kind of projects you would like to be working on, or where your skills could be most beneficial to the economy, or where you would like to try something new. So I think and this is just a guess. I'm being a bit of a Nostradamus here about what could happen, but I think there's going to be more opportunity for people to step out of the 9-to-5 structure of having one job and you commit all of your time and energy to this single role, to more of an opportunity to having a portfolio is a good description, a portfolio of different roles which allow you to best use and apply your skills, your skill set and your experience to each of those companies or organizations or projects in turn. So what it would do in my mind is it would mean that the companies have the best people that they need for those particular tasks, because a lot of us are trying to sometimes fit a square peg into a round hole with respect to our hiring procedures. We can never find a perfect person for every role, but we can find somebody who's mostly perfect for that role. But what if that 20% of activity that person wasn't good at, we brought in someone who was excellent at, for example, the organization aspect of that role, and that 20% is freed up for the original person to go and do something completely different. So I think there might be more of this, and I don't know how to describe it. Maybe someone will be a little bit more eloquent than I have with this vision, but I imagine that we'll scrap, the summary is I imagine that we'll scrap the 9-to-5 one role historical perspective of how we work, because I mean that's basically from the days of Henry Ford, really, to more of a flexible aside from flexible working for one company, I mean flexibly working for several companies, and still having the stability and the paycheck to go with that somehow. So if anyone wants to tell me how they see that working, I'm interested, but I kind of see it happening slowly.
Yeah, in the chat I use the term contractor, but I don't mean it in the sense of what we view a contractor, which often is used, I suppose, in a different way, but more, yeah, as you say, thinking of people who are brought in for, specific roles, but that part, so it could be like a 0.2 of a role, up to even, there's huge trends at the moment where, because of the furlough and the 80% salary, and a lot of people, even realizing that they're happy to live on 80% salary, and do 80% of the job. And because I suppose my background is linked to stimulating more startups and entrepreneurship, I think that's like a great, model for then allowing people, to start new businesses, with obviously some stability of, obviously a stable job in the early days, but, still being able to live. But as you say, Fiona, then, whenever obviously I've lots and lots of students, and seeing, speaking to my students that's going on of various different ages, a lot more people do want varied roles, and, experience different types of organizations. And the huge issue at the moment of, retaining talent, I think this type of model will help with that, because a lot of companies at the moment are really struggling to retain good people, because they do get a bit bored and want to try something new, and it's not that they necessarily dislike their current job. So I think if more employers are very open to this more creative way of thinking about roles, I suppose that there's obviously challenges with that, because you're having that division of labor, so trying to divide a role up, into different parts, which could link to some of the things we mentioned before about, flexible work, and where you could actually have then role overload in multiple roles. So it has to obviously be tightly managed. And so I think it's exciting to think of it like that. Some sectors it'll obviously lend itself better to than others, but there is, the fear that it will lead to role overload, which I think a lot of us would be guilty of doing ourselves sometimes, when you get excited on lots of projects and next thing you're working almost 4 full-time jobs instead of meant to be, 4 roles with a 0.25 contract or something like that.
I'll very quickly jump in, and I'll invite final comments, because I want to stick to time, and we've got 3 minutes left, and this has been absolutely brilliant. Interestingly, in the research, I ended up looking at a lot of self-managed organizations who have been around for centuries. This is not new, but they have ways of, it's not about you, the person, or that you have a fixed role. It's about the role that is required for the job in hand. That's well defined. They have frameworks for this, you write it down in various ways or whatever, and then you volunteer, you put yourself to that and say, I want to do this, and maybe people will vote you in, or whatever. You can do it different ways. But therefore, you take on the responsibility for that specific role in that specific context based on your experience. And in so doing, that is a much more flexible way of working, I think, than in a traditional organizational structure. So we're at time, essentially, 2 minutes. Does anyone have any kind of like last thoughts?
I'll just very quickly just chime into that last commenting on some of it's, sorry to use a footballing analogy, but there's a team out of Holland or the Netherlands called Ajax, and their philosophy was total football, where any player could play in any position depending on how they wanted to set up. So that to look at that as analogous to the future of work, maybe that's somewhere we can go, where you can slot in any position, albeit the downside is that you may not be able to scale up and be an expert and have deep knowledge of one area. But
very good.
And you'd see this with, I guess, some startups, maybe some of the guys know, when you're a startup of 3 or 4 people and you're just doing everything, you're just forced to look, I do all of these things, and but we still have that vision of going to achieve what we need to achieve. Very
good. Any last thoughts?
I just say it's a big experiment. It's still going on, so an experimental mindset is the best way to get through it, but it's also just the best way to work anyway, regardless of COVID.
Yeah. I think my final thought would be, and this is exactly the same for designing a product or developing a service as it is for the situation that we're in. Like, the most important thing is to speak to our employees and our teams about what they want and what we can do for them, and to work together to build that. And that's how we're going to retain our teams and the skills and talent that we already have. Is to design that new world in collaboration with each other.
I suppose my last point is the mindset, which links to all the other points, is that I think everyone going forward, you know, with everything's happened, realize that we all have to have like a flexible mindset and moving forward and being open to any possibilities in regards to forms of work, and really embracing that, because whilst it is going to pose challenges, I think, you know, it will open up, you know, greater things for how we live, how we work in the future.
Wonderful. And according to my clock, that is exactly the top of the hour. So, wow, that's great. This has been thrilling for me. Thank you so much. Especially those of you in attendance who've been sitting and listening anywhere in the world. Do by all means hit us up on LinkedIn or anywhere else. I can always communicate with people if you'd like. The video should be up online. I'll check with the panelists because I didn't get the permission ahead of time. So we'll just check all that first, but that'll be the plan. And yeah, and tell us if you want to do this again sometime. We can think of different things to work on. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to meet you guys.
Thank you so much. Great chat, everyone.